dignitaries on the dais, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, I represent the mobile operators of this country. We have one of the largest mobile networks anywhere in the world. We have over 500,000 cell towers. That's 5 lakh cell towers all over the country, 365 switching stations. And while the rest of the world has 5 networks, a landline network, a mobile network, a satellite network, a cable network, and secure government networks. In India, we have one network, which is the mobile network. The landline infrastructure is only at 7%, decreasing. So all of our communications is single-threaded in terms of risk. And so this becomes a critical factor in terms of disaster management. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we look after this one single network. Now, let me just give you an anecdote. There was a story told about a plane crash that took place several years ago. This is before sophisticated equipment was in place. And in the crash, everything was damaged. There was no survivors. Even the black box couldn't be retrieved in terms of the recording. There was a cargo of monkeys, and the only thing that survived was one monkey. And so the folks who were investigating this particular crash decided that they would try and get some information from the monkey. So over a period of time, they trained this monkey in sign language. So they told the monkey, when you eat, how do you say this? When you're afraid, what do you do? And so over a period of time, they found that the monkey could communicate somewhat in sign language. So finally they asked the monkey, says, 1 hour before the flight crashed, what were the people, what were the passengers doing? The monkey said, what was the pilot doing? What were you doing? Half an hour before the flight crashed, what were the people doing? What was the pilot doing? What were you doing? 5 minutes before the crash, what were the people doing? What was the pilot doing? What were you doing? So there are several types of disasters. Man-made disasters, emergencies, and God-made disasters. So we have to account for all 3 kinds of disasters. And so one of the things that we forget is that in a disaster, there is preventative and then response. Very often we get so caught up in addressing the outcomes of disaster that we don't pay enough attention in how we prevent a disaster. And so some of the things that we do in terms of preventing a disaster is ensuring, for example, that when we put up our towers, we ensure that the towers can withstand wind speeds of 170 kilometers or 200 kilometers. That is why when all of these disasters struck, whether it was in Odisha in the coast of Orissa, whether it was in Nepal, whether it was here in Uttarakhand, that very few of the infrastructure, the actual towers, were actually destroyed. There were elements, but the significant damage was basically in terms of the fact that we couldn't get diesel into our cell towers. That was the principal area. We'll also look to see our switching infrastructure. There are 365 elements in our switching structure. They are distributed, they are backup. All of the software is offsite so that in an event of an emergency, they can be brought back online in 24 hours. We have backup equipment for our cell towers. We have what are called cows. These are not your regular cows that you see. These are cells on wheels, so that in an emergency we can bring these. They are on back of trucks. They come pre-equipped and pre-configured. And in the event of a disaster, we can actually parachute and bring these and drop these into locations which need the coverage. And the mobile switching center, which is also a sort of a pick-up and carry infrastructure, which is all equipped, already programmed, already to go, can be brought into a situation and service can be brought up in 24 hours. These are some of the things that we do in terms of standby. So every time we configure a cell tower, all right, not only is the cell tower powered by grid power when it's available, it has somewhere from 6 to 8 hours of battery life, and it has about 24 hours of generator life. So you can see that unless the disaster is of a long-term nature, we have an ability to come back very quickly. One of the situations that we found, as I said, in a lot of the disasters is that we couldn't get diesel fast enough to get our cell towers back in service. And so we are now coordinating with the governments to ensure that we have priority carriage, be it on a helicopter or road traffic or elsewhere, to be able to get our people with the fuel to the cell tower locations. One of the things that is emerging and of increasing importance is the fact that we now have to worry about cyber protection. In fact, you notice that whole networks can be brought down as a result of cyber attacks. So we have to be aware of the types of protections that we afford. You notice that the whole nuclear system of Iran was brought down by a virus attack. You'll notice that Estonia's communications network was brought down because of a virus attack on its telecommunications network. Given that we have one large network, we have to be very careful that there is no ability to bring our whole network crashing down. And of course, we'd be out of communication services, so we're very careful. One of the things we do is now beginning to introduce what we call Aadhaar-based customer, know your customers. Because the folks who actually own the handset is one of the most vulnerable points in our network. As more and more people use smartphones, there's an increasing ability to infect our networks through these smartphones, so we have to be very careful. In terms of espionage, we have to be very careful. In terms of protecting our network, in terms of viruses, we have to be very careful. One of the things that we are working with the government, one of the things we learned is that people didn't know what number to call. There was no 911 equivalent, so now we are working with the central government to have a nationwide number, 811. That's all you need to remember, and 811 goes to a central location. So there is a central monitoring system that the government of India is now developing so that no matter where you are, if you call 811, you will know that it goes to a live monitoring situation. Previously, we didn't know whether it went to the police station, we didn't know whether it went to the fire department, we didn't know whether it went to the ambulance situation. There was a lot of confusion as to where these calls were. The other thing that we've also found is that as a result of the increasing use of social media, that in a disaster, people can find one another as a result of the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook connections and all of this. So again, I encourage you folks, if you haven't gotten introduced into social media, start using social media. It's a good way to find one another in an emergency and to keep in touch. The other thing that we found that in a disaster situation, that a lot of the folks that had the handset couldn't actually communicate because their battery was running low. If you are going out for an extended period of time, if you are going out on a pilgrimage, if you are going somewhere and power is iffy, please carry a hand crank. Alright, this is one of those devices that you can buy, that you can fix to the back of your phone, that if you crank it, you'll have enough juice to make an emergency call. If you have an emergency, if you have a phone, please remember, you keep it on, we know your location. So just enough juice to keep your phone on tells us where you are. And our networks are smart enough to be able to pick that up and go with us. So we have an elaborate network and care, both in terms of preventing disasters from happening and also recovering when there is a disaster. So again, rest assured that we put up upwards of 50 to 20,000 towers. We're covering more and more areas, areas like the northeast and the Chhattisgarh area where there is problems in terms of insurgency, J&K. We're building towers. The DOT has got a program to build out towers. So increasingly we're going to make sure that even if disaster strikes there, we're in ability to recoup and protect the folks who are